Ho 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 ho! Welcome to Color Gold with Bleach Revisited. If this is all on the right date, this should be uploading just in time for Christmas Day, so I wish you all a happy holiday if you're watching this in season. If you're one of the many who aren't, well, I still wish you a happy holiday. So let's get right into hell. There's a lot going on in this chapter. It's maybe not exactly seasonal. We'll get there. We'll get there. But as always, with this series, with Bleach Revisited, we go through Bleach, we reread the chapter. If it's your first time, it's just going to be a read of the chapter, isn't it? Otherwise, after that, I'll proceed on to an analysis and review, both of the narrative as well as the art. And finally, we'll talk about foreshadowing and how it connects to Bleach as a manga at large. So if those other parts interest you more than the read, if you're just here for one or the other, feel free to jump around in the video. Timestamps should be in the description. But without further ado, let's get into this, because it's a pretty dense chapter. Chapter 12, Gate of the End. Ah! You son of a... You ripped out my tongue! Ah! Bleach, Gate of the End. Ah! My leg! My leg! Now you can't move or use your bombs. You're helpless. Feels bad, doesn't it? That's what your victims felt. Fear's a terrible thing. Makes you want to hack off your own leg to escape it. Don't forget that fear. Drive it deep in your brain and disappear. Ah! Hmm? No, no, please. Ah! What? What is it? It's hell. I told you. The Zanpakuto cleanses the soul of its crimes, so it can enter the Soul Society. But not all hollows make it in. The Zanpakuto can only wash away the sins a soul has committed as a hollow. Those who committed heinous crimes while they were alive we hand over to hell. Look, the gates are opening. Ah! He was cast into hell? So, I'm sorry. The chain of fate has been long severed. It's gone. Too much time has passed. It's too late to get his own body back. No. Yuichi. That's okay. Don't worry. The Soul Society is a nice place. You'll never be hungry, and you'll be happy. It's better than here. Oh, really? Sales pitch? That might be true. Anyway, if you can go there, you can see your mother. We can't bring her back to life, but you can be with her there. This time it's true. She's waiting for you. Ichigo. Alright. Shall we start the conso? Yeah. Chad. Thanks for everything. It was nothing. You saved me from that monster. It was nothing. I'd better get going. Thank you very much. Yuichi, when I die and go over there, can I carry you around? Run around one more time? Sure. Okay, let's do this. Ready? Thanks, Ichigo. And that is it for Chapter 12. Pretty quick read. Probably the quickest read so far on this channel. That said, there is obviously a good bit of kind of new information here, new things to decipher. So, without further ado, let's hop right into the analysis and response for the chapter. So, we're picking up off of, again, right where the last chapter left, like the big, narrative beat of Ichigo ripping out the tongue of Shrieker the Hollow so that it can no longer, explode and use its artillery. Doesn't completely defang it, literally, but takes out, its major advantage in this fight. And I think this is such a, whenever I talked about in the previous chapter how I felt like maybe the moment of the tongue being ripped out could have been better sold in the panel. Like it's effective the way that it's framed, but there could have been some other things done that really maybe sell that and make it more visceral. I think here we have a fantastic following for what we got of, Ichigo, just this backward kind of momentum. You get a good, really restrained use of like the actual lines here. Between just shading and the way that they're handled, a lot of the shading being done downward like this. So again, whenever I talk about like the intentionality of using lines, right, and shading and line work, having most of your lines be downward facing or downward sloping like this gives this real sense that draws the eye down or up even, but usually down. Uh, and so we get this sense of Ichigo, ripping this tongue up and out. And you don't even have to use any action lines from that. You could just use your shading to show that. And so if the shading was like left-right cross-hatched, rather than up-down the way that it is, so we'll see a little bit of that on Shrieker here, where, here in his arms, or here it's a little bit more left-right. Because this is, again, and we'll get into this. This is shaded to where it looks like he's like kind of peeling back from that other panel, moving away from that. But just using those those lines that way really effectively kind of sells that action. But also the way that these two panels are framed, obviously with Ichigo pulling this arm up, the entire white background to focus on, again, these character moments, this really powerful exchange between these characters. And then, of course, frame wise, obviously, we get part of the tongue that rolls up. You have the distinct cut in between of the panel, but also, the distance that we can see as we read from right to left. So I think just visually, like even without the shading, selling the action, right, the momentum of it, I think just the way that these panels are arranged, and like not just like the panels themselves, but the art within the panel, right? Conscious of how the other panel is going to be laid out. I think that's fantastic stuff. And again, a previous episode I talked about intentionality of lines and thickening and thinning your lines in a single stroke, and you can see a lot of that on display here, especially in Shrieker, and how these lines thin and thicken up, and then draw like thicker here where it's kind of connecting up near the top. I think you could see how the part of the shoulder kind of thins out as it curves down in. And we even get that here. I think this is, talking about like good deliberate lines. This mask line coming here and then kind of thinning out as it goes to really sell like the curvature of the mask. Great stuff. Something that wouldn't be sold as well with like a much sketchier line or a less deliberate line. So, already here we can see like clearly Kubo can do this. It's just that, it varies. Again, his earlier artwork isn't as polished, isn't as deliberate a style as is later. I mean, stylistically, yes, it's maybe a conscious choice, maybe, but I tend to read it more as, this is him. He's coming out of like high school. It's there's an amount of um, I say amateur, but I don't mean that derogatorily. Uh, if anything, it kind of gives it a certain um, like stamp to it, really. And that's always the problem that you run with art, right? Because whenever we talk about professional art, we're talking about art that's really influenced by the context of what art is accepted and seen as worthwhile in the medium, naturally. Typically, that tends to be the case. And so, usually, whenever someone trains towards professionalism, they're training in a lot of techniques and styles and things that make them closer towards this kind of I don't want to say it's like an idealized way of rendition, but it certainly fits within maybe more of a public sphere of what people find pleasing to the eye in the current cultural consciousness. And that can vary a whole lot, right? Obviously, if you look at like medieval art versus pop art versus anything, right? Just look at a lot art across the years, and you can see how what we find aesthetically appealing has shifted in different ways, and what there's always like something pushing the boundary. But whenever I say that comes at the risk of your own sort of style a lot of the time, right? And I mean your style will come through no matter what. Don't worry about that if you're an artist. Like I think a lot of amateur artists actually that tends to be a concern of theirs, where they're like, how do I really build my style? And it's like, don't worry, your style will always show through. Even whenever you become the most polished and professional you can be, like you're still going to have a distinctiveness to the way that you just render art. But whenever you're more amateur, I think you rely a lot more on the way that your brain pictures how you want to conjure things, right? So with art, it's always you tend to start from a place of imagination and then trying to depict that imagination and creating your own visual shorthand for that. So like being like, okay, how am I going to draw hair? And Kubo's like, well, this is how I'm going to depict hair, right? This is how I'm going to depict like an arm and a hand. And as you trend more towards professionalism, you trend more towards the techniques more people tend to be the more accepted ways, or quote unquote professional ways of depicting those things. So you move away from what might be your own personal sort of depictions. And certainly, I mean, like whenever we speak in terms of like actual, accurate visual displays, I mean, obviously you want to display something maybe a little bit more true to life rather than wholly from your imagination. It's easy to like symbolize things in the imagination, right? But I mean, art in a lot of ways can be symbolic. So like the way that these eyes are drawn, for instance, I mean, especially in manga, um, that always kind of helps to show, like, because you're hardly going to get a completely photorealistic eye in manga, right? But if you look at a character's eyes, you can always tell like how the artist really wants to visualize this idea of an eye. So I think, and like that's one of the things that I think is always real cool to look at with any mangaka, is like kind of how they draw their characters' faces, expressions, and eyes, especially. There's some good images floating around with all the eyes from Bleach, and it's really easy to pick out each character just solely based off of their eyes, which is, one of the criticisms, again, getting the criticisms that Bleach gets. A lot of people criticize that a lot of characters have kind of similar features or look the same, which I think is one of the weakest criticisms I hear of Bleach, because if anything, Kubo's character design is stand out. Like it's so easy to distinctly tell each of his characters. There's a lot of strong silhouettes. There's a lot of effective, like just character detail without it being over detailed. Um, yeah, and I could talk about that at length if you're interested in like amateur art versus professional art, are what that affords versus what it doesn't, are what makes a good character design. We could talk about that in the comments. Like that's all more that's more abstracted from Bleach. But here, the reason why I'm bringing that up is that Kubo certainly you can already get the sense that his technique is already pretty refined. He's been doing manga for a good bit now, but there's still enough of his personal kind of style that shines through, especially early on. And even if it's sketchier, it really sells. And I think this is a great moment, a great page to show that off. Kind of cool that you see his tongue has he's got like a smaller mouth that his tongue is coming out of. And I think that's one of my favorite things about the hollow designs is because they have this big mask that tends to have teeth, but then they tend to have a smaller mouth inside of the mask. And I love that, I don't know, the double layer mouth is super grotesque in a way. I don't know. It works for me. Um, yeah, yeah, I love it. But yeah, we start to really see that here as Shrieker pulls back, and we see a little bit more of that other mouth. Yeah, I love Ichigo here plunging his sword into Shrieker's leg. Also, Shrieker's face is just the way that it's split makes for great reactions. It really is a good design. Again, let's see. Yeah, just reading Ichigo's glove there. But posing characters in cool outfits. That's Kubo. So yeah, as we continue here, we've clearly got Ichigo. He's strategizing, right? We're seeing him much more competent in this fight than the one that he was in with Hasenringer. So his training maybe is paying off, or he's thinking more seriously about these combat situations. But interestingly enough, he had the opportunity there. Like, why didn't he just kill this Hollow, right? I think in a lot of ways he's trying to make him suffer. Like, especially with how piece of just garbage, how much Ichigo must hate this person for how he's treating Yuichi and how he's using the death of his mother and all of that. Ichigo's really trying to kind of instill this fear in the Hollow to really kind of get back at him. And that layer of Ichigo, that kind of I don't know, that vindictiveness. It's it's common that we'll see there's times whenever shonen protagonists kind of get a little darker, a little edgier, or whatever. I don't think here it really it doesn't sell as super edgy really, because it's this dude's a serial killer and is literally taking advantage of this child to eat people's souls and lying to him about his mother and all of that. Yeah, he deserves some amount of suffering, which obviously he will get. But still, we get Ichigo really, really trying to drive it in, this kind of maybe righteousness of this person's done a horrible thing and deserves to feel the same sort of pain. But yeah, Shrieker cuts his own leg off, starts to fly away, and then I love that Ichigo already has an answer to that, where he's like, yeah, that's fear. Right? And cuts him down for that. I think the really interesting thing is, the idea of this sort of lesson makes no sense in any other series where you're just killing the entity right here. But in Bleach, where their soul continues to live, maybe it is Ichigo really trying to instill in this spirit, hey, what you've done is wrong, and you'll feel the retribution for that, and this fear that you're feeling now, you better not forget it. Even whatever next cycle you go into. So I think that that's what differentiates this moment from if another character was doing this to in any other manga to a character that we're intending to kill. It's dude, you're gonna kill them. What why are you trying to teach them a lesson if they're a danger? Just kill them if that's what you've already decided on, right? And then in that case, it becomes more well, amateurishly, it becomes more just a way to show off a character, and like what they stand for or whatever BS, or to have an edgy moment. But realistically, it's just a moment for that character to like feel better about themselves and to feel like maybe that there exists some level of justice in the world or something. Because at that point, all the theatrics aren't for, it's not for the person to learn a lesson because they're going to kill them. It's for themselves or whoever ends up watching. It's really for you as the audience. Which is why I was, talking about, preface that with like it feels a little hokey from like an artist or an author or whatever to do that. But here, like I said, I think it's a lot more sensible because Ichigo knows that these souls, especially from the previous encounter with Asawire, that these souls will pass on and continue to live. And so, without Ichigo being aware of hell, he's like, well, this guy I'm going to just banish into Soul Society. I want him to understand this, right? But yeah, love the just, he's like, I'm gonna get away, and Ichigo's just leapt up there to get him. Uh, Probably, honestly, one of my favorite depictions of his Zanbakuto so far, because we often don't see it all in one panel, but here really sells the length of the blade without feeling like over exaggerated for the sake of the scene. But yeah, again, fantastic anticipatory into just this full, swiping action really draws our eye across the page. Here's a place where using those sketchier lines works because it sells like the hugeness of this swing. Really kind of exaggerates it. But yeah, and like again, the cleanness of like this line thinning as it comes across, really selling like the dimensions of his Zanpakuto. There's a lot here. It's good stuff. But yeah, I love it as he cuts him down. Here Ichigo's surprised. And you're like, well, what's he got to be surprised for? He just cleaved his face in half. And I said in the previous chapter, Kubo often doesn't break this the panel structure with things, but this certainly does. And maybe it does because I think this is our first 2-page spread that we've actually gotten in the entire manga so far that at least I've been aware of. Reading this page by page. But yeah, we get the splitting. I love the way this is framed, where we get the splitting of his mask that comes down further and then creates the entire gates to hell here. But again, breaking the panel orientation by, the panel kind of camels being separate and all, by having all of his pleas and like this scream kind of travel through. Again, we got that in chapter 1 with Ichigo kind of giving us like a big, like to break out of the binding spell, the Keto that Rukia put on him. But yeah, and here we get this great shot of the gates of hell where there's these bound and wrapped skeletons. There's all these chains. Immediately maybe evokes the chain of fate that we've been seeing on characters, but also the idea that there's this like super cursed lock. There's all these talismans on it. This big gate. And yeah, Ichigo being real thrown, and then Rukia giving him kind of darkly expressing, we cleared the hollow soul of its crimes, but only what it's done is a hollow. So those truly wicked souls don't make it to Soul Society. And it's interesting, they bring up this idea of like sins, and I'm curious what constitutes a sin within universe, because it hasn't really been made apparent to us yet, right? So I think we can assume sin as far as like murder, crimes against other humanity at the very least. And yeah, heinous crimes is basically the most we get spelled out there. And I wonder, because again, if this is meant to be based off of kind of a Shinto or even Buddhist understanding of mythology, then the idea is that these souls, continue this cycle. So hell is just meant to be less a place that they're damned for eternity, but that for a very, very long time, their soul is essentially tormented to the point that, like, whenever they do enter another incarnative cycle, then, like, their soul just has imprinted upon them. It's been mashed out of them. Uh, Hopefully, the will to do anything horrible. But yeah, here we get this spread, and unfortunately, I can't on this reader do a 2-page. If anybody has a good manga reader that does 2 pages at the same time, please let me know. I'd love to have that for the channel. A lot of reading online tends to be single page by single page, and these 2-page spreads really sell better whenever you can read them together, especially whenever you're going right to left like this. So it becomes kind of strange in the reader whenever we see it that way. But yeah, here what we're supposed to be getting is across the entire top panel, these gates being flung open, Shrieker, just having this huge scream as we see part of his mask disintegrating here. Ichigo kind of buckling back, Rukia, understanding that this is going to happen, and then this blade thrusting through Shrieker in the bottom left. It's really fantastic way of selling that kind of action and selling that huge moment. I think this is one of the issues I have, especially with, like, again, talking about Bleach contemporaries, especially with One Piece, where, like, these huge moments will happen in One Piece, and they clutter the panel and, like, the moment that you're supposed to be paying attention to with so much other garbage that, like, it becomes impossible to discern what order you should be reading things in. It looks like there's literally moments that, like, something's cool is supposed to be happening, but it reads more like a fucking Family Circus comic, like where, like, there's, like, all the dots all over the place. Not even then you can follow that better. It's ugh. And like, I think, again, as much as I bring up these other contemporaries to kind of praise Bleach as compared to them, there's certainly things that they do better than Bleach. I'm not just here to diss on One Piece or Naruto. I think they rightfully earn their place in the big three for different reasons, and there's things that they do within their narrative, or within their art, or within any of that I think is valuable and good and better than Bleach in a lot of ways. But by the same point, I think one of the points that I try to make throughout this series is that Bleach has, among its contemporaries, and really among a lot of shonen manga, just stellar sense of how to lay out its panels, how to kind of create very readable action. I don't think there's like never a part in Bleach where I've been super confused about what's happening. Whereas there's definitely moments, and it gets worse the longer a manga goes on, because either exhaustion or having assistants pick up more slack, so the author has their hand on a little bit less, things like that. Like, I remember there's definitely moments in the Ninja War at the end of Naruto, and, like, there's just action that's completely illegible. Like, you read several pages and it's hard to follow have any sense of momentum of what's happening. The choreography's just not there. Like, things aren't weighty. They just don't sell the action. Whereas, like, and again, maybe it's unfair comparing early Bleach, but I mean, this still holds true, even more so in later Bleach. Just like moments like this, where, like, this huge blade is being thrown through him, and all the shading and lines and everything really sells that action. And then this entire 2-page spread, even though obviously we have it split across 2 pages, you'd read the top panel and then right to left through the bottom, and even if you left through right to the bottom, you still get the same sense of all this kind of simultaneously happening, of Shrieker being, like, decimated in these ways. And I think that's fantastic. It's just it's very clean. It reads very clearly. It doesn't leave much to interpretation as far as, like, what's actually happening goes. I will say here, hopping back into kind of some other analysis, as this gate opens, we do get these huge like ropes with the talismans on them. You'll often see, I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be evocative of, like, holy sites, or at the very least of, like, Obviously, this is roped off, but you'll see that on a lot of shrines and stuff in Japan, where they'll have ceremonial kind of rope tied across, like what is it? Kind of just holy sites, really denoting it as like a place of spiritual importance. And again, I'm no expert on this, but feel free to let me know in the comments if you have any cultural insight in some of this. Kubo draws from a lot of different cultural inspiration. It's not all Japanese religious stuff, although that's a lot of what we get early on. And yeah, here we have this huge arm, some kind of tattooed pattern on it, kind of coming out of the gates, having skewered here. Shrieker. There's this kind of laughter, these eyes behind there. Again, this heavy tattooing. Which again, we already talked before about kind of how tattoos are interpreted in especially Japanese culture. But here we have like more than just tattooing, this kind of almost like kabuki style makeup, which typically was done to really exaggerate the features of different characters. And here, I think it has the same purpose, but it's supposed to be maybe evocative of that. And yeah, we get this huge haunting laughter. Gates shut, everything kind of cracks apart and then shatters away. Pretty huge moment as Shrieker gets cast into hell. Again, we get another crescent moon, really punctuates again these encounters with these hollows. We'll see that a lot. It's easy to associate with hollows as well as Ichigo in some ways too. So I think in the trailer that we got for the anime, I think one of the first things that we got to see was a shot of the night sky with the moon in it. I'm pretty sure. Anyway, good stuff. It's good symbol for Bleach. I think it's easy to overlook a lot of the time how commonly this moon, especially with like the swept clouds like that, that's very, very distinctively like a Bleach panel and symbol. Anyway, yeah, we return to Yuichi. We get to mention this chain of fate. So, if you remember with Orihime, she was like, okay, well, the chain of fate is still connected to her body. She's not really dead yet. I can heal her with Kido, right? But here we have this, establishment of like, look, the chain of fate's been severed a long time ago. Too much time has passed. We can't get him back in his own body, right? It's been months. Like, he's dead. He's dead. And I mentioned we didn't see the chain of fate on any of the spirits that we saw in the series before Orihime. And if I remember correctly, the one shot of Bleach, and I'll have to cover the one shot sometime as like a special episode. It deals with all of the Orihime getting murdered kind of stuff. So it's always been like a plot I think Kubo had in mind, especially the idea of the chain of fate. I just wonder if depicting it completely not there is meant to early on. Well, early on, I think it's meant to not just not to be an element of design, so we don't have to worry about or think about it. But moreover, I think it not being there is meant to symbolize that these are truly dead spirits that have been dead for a while. But yeah, we get this iteration from Rukia, like, hey, don't worry, Soul Society's nice, you're not going to be hungry, it's better than here. I like that Ichigo kind of immediately is like, really, and kind of reads it as a sales pitch. We'll always get Ichigo being dubious of these like larger structures, he'll obviously play along, like he goes to school, he's not skipping class all the time, but whenever he needs to, he will. know so here, like, he doesn't 100% buy like the idea of it being a better place than here, but he does consider that it might be true because Yuichi does maybe get to see his mom, and that's what's important to Yuichi, right? But again, we get a little bit more world building there, that like at the very least Rukia considers Soul Society a better place than Earth and like the mortal realm. And then also, you don't have to eat. You'll never be hungry. So that's interesting. Anyway, yeah. you know, it's neat stuff. They go ahead and go along with the console. I think this is Ichigo's first actual performance of a console, so that's cool. I love that we get this moment between Chad and Shibata, Yuichi. We actually get to see his spirit as well. I love Chad being very stoic about like, oh yeah, it's no problem, like it was nothing. But also this kind of sweet moment of Chad expressing like, hey, whenever I die, I'd love to like kind of go and carry you around, and we can hang out another time. But yeah, here we don't see the chain at all on the kid, so I've got to imagine just not depicting the chain is probably what Kubo wanted to go with early on, rather than having half of a chain or showing like how disintegrated it is versus not. Um, Kind of interesting stuff, but it is clearly a very important element of spiritual design at times. I like both the parakeet and him having the same expression. I think that's good. We also get to see a lot of the other characters' expressions here, um, and I think this flows really well, from where we were earlier. Like, I mean, we got a really big moment, right? With like this huge, like he was cast into hell, this huge gate. It's very intense. And I think the reason why we get such a breather from that is by having again this scene setting panel coming to a new page, and then returning to like this scene establishing like larger panel. Um, and also kind of having this denouement where she's like, "Look, I'm sorry, this interstate's been severed." All of that. It helps really roll us into having this kind of more personal moment, both between Ichigo and Yuichi, as well as Yuichi and Chad. And so, as far as just like pacing goes, like it doesn't read as I think like a lesser mangaka, somebody that wasn't as aware of how they wanted to kind of pace out these beats, would maybe feel very jarring, right? Or like a little too sudden. But I think this transition works incredibly well, and it works so well that it's easy not to like realize or think about. And I think that's like the best transitions is whenever you don't even realize like how effectively it's moving you from one narrative beat to the next. But yeah, I like that everybody gets a little involved. Again, I love this little expression there. um, and yeah, we get the soul butterfly, the hell butterfly, whatever they're called. Um, you know, the black butterfly flying away. Uh, Again, we get the moon with the clouds nearby. So maybe even associating that with soul reapers or like the spiritual world or afterlife, certainly punctuating again that hollow encounter, but also again being used on a page turn to set up a bit of scenery to kind of cleanse our palette to help us move to another scene, and then establishing again, here's the scene. We're back in the Kurosaki clinic. Um, I love that she's sleeping. I love that they're in bed together. It's cute. Uh, and she's Karen's really she's remembering or has this impression of the parakeet and thinks Ichigo. Now she can feel at ease from all the pain that she was in before. That's cute. We get a nice little image of the parakeets representing obviously Yuichi's spirit and kind of moving onward to other things. So, pretty cool chapter. Establishes, obviously we now have hell, which is a pretty huge thing, right? Before we just had, spirits go to the Soul Society, even hollows. So it's interesting that this is maybe aligning more with uh, the sort of, mythologies that we like to imagine, um, that are more, I guess, relevant or real world or whatever. Anyway, that's it for analysis. I think this is a great chapter as far as the artwork's concerned, and as far as just like if you want to look at a place as far as narrative kind of beats. I think this is early Bleach really firing on a lot of cylinders, really, doing good character moments, good character interaction, good world building, like very effective organic world building, but also visually just selling a lot of great action, selling a lot of really cool character moments, lots of striking, effective visuals, lots of good line work, lots of great paneling. Just lots to love about this chapter all around. Probably one of the strongest chapters, like consistently across the board. Maybe didn't affect me as much as some of the other chapters, but it doesn't have to be that had that sort of effect or resonance to still be like just a high quality chapter. Anyway, getting into analysis, right? Or not analysis, but foreshadowing. Excuse me there. Foreshadowing, connecting to other things in the manga. Obviously, there's a lot that happens this chapter, so we've got a good bit to talk about. But if you don't want spoilers, this is your time to get out of the spoiler zone. Go ahead, enjoy your Christmas, otherwise, or your day. But if you're interested in those connections to Bleach as a larger whole, here we go. So again, we get this sort of vindictiveness of Shrieker, and I love, we're starting to see, especially like Ichigo really kind of having this that it, oftentimes Ichigo doesn't kill his opponent outright, right? He wants to affect change, and he's not the kind of person that thinks change is going to just happen because he's going to kill somebody. And we saw that before, whenever he was beating up the thugs in the first chapter, right? He didn't just beat the shit out of them. He had the whole like apologize to this girl, why do you knock over this vase? All of that. Like he had this whole thing that he went through, this whole routine to kind of not just instill fear in them, but also to teach them like a lesson, right? And we'll see that as Ichigo goes on in places where maybe he can't like effectively, change the minds of his opponents, or wield his power in order, but kind of impress his morals upon them, right? Or as his way of thinking. So it's interesting, like, to think of Ichigo using power as leverage to express, like, his own, like I said, his morals are his own perspective. And I think that's why, I think and I mean, that's certainly a lot of protagonists that's going to be the case. But I think with Ichigo, that ends up being interesting because that ends up being a kind of neat struggle for him throughout the manga. But here, clearly, we get him being very vindictive, very wanting Shrieker to understand, like, just how horrible the things he's done are. Yeah. Great crescent slash there. And finally, we get, Gates of Hell. And for the longest time, as you know, this didn't come up forever. We got the Hellverse film, but, that's loosely canon. There's like a chapter that Kubo did to kind of tie into it where Aroniro and Sazale are in Hell. And that's kind of considered maybe non-canonical. It's in that gray zone. Just kind of like how the first Bleach movie is sort of like Memories of Nobody. Like it gets referenced kind of in Thousand Year Blood War, but we don't know how much of that we can consider to be canonical. Anyway, obviously with the new Hellverse chapter, we're learning a bit more, right? And so this whole Gates of Hell and Hell being a place where sinners go, pretty important to the newest chapter of Bleach that was released for the 20th anniversary. We still haven't gotten an arc from it as of making this video. So if more of that comes out, obviously there are connections I can't draw to stuff I haven't read because it doesn't exist yet. But as we saw in that Hellverse chapter, which if you haven't read, go read the Hellverse chapter. what are you doing? The No Breaths of Hell, Chapter 1, right? 80 pages or some such. New Bleach one shot after several years of it not being published. But in that, we get Yukitake stabbing through the gates of hell to impel Sazale, right? And I think that's clearly meant to be evocative of this very moment where we have this other entity stabbing through, and impelling this character. And so, it leads us to question, like, okay, well, who is this, right? Who is this figure that we get the glimpse of, right? The huge armor, all the tattooing. And I don't know that we have any design to really link that to. That said, with the way that Kenpachi Zaraki, or Zaraki Kenpachi, I was about to just say Kenpachi, but then I was like, there's a lot of Kenpachi. That's a title, that's not his name. But Zaraki, the way that he gets depicted a lot, is very evocative of especially like this demonic sort of figure. We even get with his Bankai release, I believe, like a much more like an expression that fits a lot more this kind of kabuki style makeup. Um, and I wouldn't be surprised, especially with the revelation that we get, that very powerful souls from Soul Society end up in hell, right? Are just powerful souls in general. That their reishi is too dense to reintegrate into the spiritual world, and so they're basically banished to hell to kind of maintain some sort of balance there. Uh, I think about like the Ashura, talking about like that kind of realm in mythology, but even still, it wouldn't surprise me if this is a Kenpachi, um, like one of the Kenpachis of times past. Now, we haven't gotten a lot of depiction in the manga of other Kenpachi. Configure Your Old World, of course, sets up Azashiro, but he's not dead yet. It sets up Kurashiki, I think, who is pretty cool, and this might fit that, maybe, but obviously he didn't have tattoos or anything, but that could obviously change with his hell design, as we saw Sazale's designs change significantly after arriving in hell in that Hellverse chapter. So this very well could be a Kenpachi if it's meant to be any Soul Reaper character whatsoever. I think here, and especially considering like linking it to like that Hellverse stuff, I don't know how much of that Kubo had planned from the onset, because so much of that ends up being revelatory to even like captain level characters at that point, right? That like hell isn't just a place for sinners. Um, the whole like why do you think they call them hell butterflies bit, I don't know that feels like that feels like a nonsense revelation. That feels like a like something that doesn't even hold significance, because it's like, okay, well, like what is the significance of that being tied to actual hell, other than just saying, hey, Soul Reapers are more tied to hell than you think, Um, yeah, the black butterfly being like a signifier of the afterlife and the dead and all of that, certainly I think comes from some Mexican kind of mythology, if I remember correctly. But like, and it's certainly meant to be evocative of that throughout the series. That like when we see those black butterflies, it's evocative of the spiritual realm and the Soul Reapers and spirits passing on. We get a lot with like Rukia showing up early on, right? So I don't think that it's supposed to necessarily be a signifier of hell, but like a connection between the Shinigami and hell that's always been there that maybe they've forgotten. But yeah, as far as this figure, and if Kubo really intended this figure to be an actual character, or if retroactively it's going to be a character, that's something that's kind of impossible to say, because I don't think we have anything that clearly connects to this design before that reveal in the Hell Arc chapter. Um, Like I said, I think the closest thing is Kenpachi's design, and that even that's a bit of a stretch. If there are any Zanpakuto that fit this sort of like, you know, this cleaver that's cleaved through him, this sort of, hiltless. It's almost like a cane sword. I mean, there's Benihime, right? That's about as close as what we get, but clearly this isn't Benihime. It's not Kisuke. So I'm curious, if there are any connections that you can draw here between this design and the other design in Bleach. Go ahead and let me know in the comments. Again, mark your comment for spoilers so that you're not drawing in people that aren't, you know, ahead and all of that. But I'm curious what other people think. If this is meant to be, just a generic kind of Guardian of Hell, if we're not thinking on it longer, or if it's meant to really be, evocative of another character. And we just haven't gotten there in the manga yet, but Kubo had an idea here. I don't know. Um, yeah, I couldn't tell you. That's more or less it. Um, Again, we get this idea of the chain of fate being severed too long, all of that. I mean that's sensible, that follows. Rukia insisting Soul Society being a nice place is fucking bizarre. I mean, I say fucking bizarre. It makes total sense here because she's trying to reassure you, Shibata, right? She's trying to like let him know, like, hey, it's gonna be okay, you know. And maybe that's why we even get that little tiny grimace here from Rukia. That's the way that I'm reading that. Um, though maybe that's meant to be more of like it's okay and like be like a reassuring moment. But I read this as kind of her not fully believing that because again, she's coming from the slums, right? She's had a really rough time. If it wasn't for her sister being Byakuya's baby mama, like there'd be nothing, right? So it's interesting to consider how much of this is Rukia lying versus how much of this is her propagandized versus how much of this is like how much are we meant to read into this. I certainly think that she's trying to reassure Shibata, and that regardless of what she feels, she's not going to fully display that. But maybe this panel shows that she doesn't quite consider it that way. That line about "you'll never be hungry" is interesting. So, if I remember correctly, there are specifically scenes of like these kids like stealing food, right? But the spirits don't have to eat. I think you only really have to eat if your reishi density is so high, maybe. And even then, I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's still fulfilling and it still feels nice to eat, you know. But I think the line about spirits don't have to eat, I believe it holds to be a bit true, but still is a little weird in that, like, okay, well then, what's the deal with these slums if there isn't an issue of providing, you know, eating, and if everything's made out of reishi, then why the hell are some of the reishi structures just fucking ghettos? It's curious. It's incredibly curious. Um, I don't know. Soul Society, like as a setting, has a lot of stuff to it that I think I don't know that it needs to be addressed, but I think certainly it raises concerns. Um, and maybe some of it just is the way that it is because it allows Kubo to write these different character backgrounds and plot beats, but I like to think of the world as being more thought out than that, right? But yeah, the hunger thing's an interesting topic, and I think that holds true, but again, I believe the idea of they can eat, and obviously, stronger souls maybe needing to eat being a thing. Um, that insistence on him being happy and being better than here is obviously speculatory, right? Uh, it's interesting that Ichigo, again, I mentioned this in my analysis that he says that might be true, but I think him saying that might be true, yeah, like Ruki being like, what? Again, maybe is meant to show that she's kind of giving a sales pitch of sorts. I think Ichigo's right to call it out as that. I love him also kind of pulling up his britches here, or maybe having like a lean in with his hands in his belt. I like this pose with Ichigo. Same thing. I think this panel is hilarious. Like great kind of comedic expressions from both of them. Could be using this sort of dimpled background to maybe even sell that in a way, but dimpled, whatever. It's not dithering because it's evenly spread. Whatever that is, whatever that effect that is, whatever tone, you know. Ugh, the word's not coming to me. Anyway, um, but I like that Ichigo chimes in because he knows, hey, if your mother's dead, she'd be in Soul Society. She's a good person. She's passed on, hopefully. Hasn't become a hollow, hopefully. But I think again Ichigo's catching on what Ryu's doing, and it's like, hey, look, you can see your mother, and he's trying to reassure Yuichi. And I think to an extent, Ichigo's in the same kind of place where he feels like, yeah, if I was to pass on, maybe I could see my mother again. So there's a bit of relating there, certainly. Um, as aggressive as we see Ichigo here, we see big happy smiley Ichigo. But yeah. Again, interesting to get that Kanso from Ichigo. We get a little bit of that kind of chat interaction, and obviously, as we know, back later in Soul Society, I mean, Chad doesn't die to go there, but later in Soul Society, he does carry Yuichi around. They do reunite, so it's kind of cute. Yuichi hasn't found his mother yet, but it is cute that we do get that connection again um, from Chad and this kid. And then again, we get the sense of Chad really having this sort of innocent bond that he forms with other people and being this kind of gentle giant character. So we get a little bit of that there. Um, I don't know if that kind of parallels. I don't know that we have a lot of Chad connecting with spirits throughout the rest of the series. He kind of gets backgrounded a lot, as you know, and as we've discussed. But it's cool that at least that moment gets paid off. Again, Crescent Moon kind of punctuating. We get that Hell Butterfly, which is kind of neat. Like, obviously, there's that happens as we know whenever a Kanso is performed. The butterfly comes from the Kanso. We saw that with the one that Rukia performed early on in the first chapter. So here we get that again, but also we get that punctuating this interaction with Hell. So kind of neat that is also visually brought up here too. Um, Again, strawberry pajamas, or I gotta assume maybe cherry. But yeah, that spiritual sense from Karen kind of coming through as she clearly recognizes that that's been fixed. But otherwise, that's it for the chapter. Um, the biggest connection is clearly being Hellverse and to that later bit in Soul Society where Chad and Yuichi meet up, as well as kind of Ichigo and the way that he treats his enemies and the way that he wields his power. Um, I think Ichigo kind of works for me a lot as a protagonist because he's willing to kind of kick a lot of ass, but also, he doesn't like mortal high ground too much. And I always hate whenever a protagonist gets a little bit too full of themselves, too much like, and that's the power of friendship and good. Same thing. It can be obnoxious whenever they get far too edgy. Especially whenever it doesn't serve a purpose, right? Whenever it narratively doesn't bring us anywhere like worthwhile. Um, Thinking like currently, there was most recently a My Hero Academia arc where we had a main character be incredibly edgy and then get pulled out of it, and I don't know that it did really effectively anything. So here at least, it helps build some things. And it's not, obviously, it's not nearly to that extent. But yeah, yeah, yeah. Maybe I should tag these spoiler parts for spoilers for other manga too. Jeez, I'm spoiling everything up in here. But yeah, that's been it for this video. As always, spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.